Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and today is the second of our 15-minute research boosts for 2021. So it's still appropriate to be saying Happy New Year to anyone that we have not seen prior to this. Today's 15-minute research boost is going to be about rigor. And as always, I am very thankful to the student who suggested I do these, asking me to talk about my own process as a researcher. And every time I do, I end up learning things. And lo and behold, today is no different than that. So we'll have an interesting conversation about rigor. And then anyone who has a question can put that into www.wooclap.com/15 minutes. And that's where you put questions. That allows the chat to be used by all of you for conversation with each other. And I'll look at the chat at the end, but the questions that you have that you might want me to answer afterwards should go into WooClap. So good morning, if in whatever part of the world you're in. I see some good mornings and some good evenings. It's just 5 o'clock where I am in Ireland, and I know that we have people in South Africa and many people from the United States and Canada as well. So wherever you are in the world, we're very glad you're here. Now, let's talk about rigor. I'm going to refer these, by the way, the slides are in the handouts, and I think you might want them because I put in URLs that of the source material I'm talking about. This one, which is from Inform Science, and it's specifically geared towards science that has multiple sources and cuts across any particular scientific genre or silo. I found to be just one of the best articles I've found in a long time on the subject of rigor. It's recent and it's provocative. So I will be quoting from it several times. One of the most interesting things you can say to a group of insulting things you can say to a group of academics is that their research isn't rigorous. This is hardly surprising given the importance ascribed to rigor in our doctoral training and in the subsequent review and publication process. What is more surprising is that there are no clear consensus regarding what rigor means. Does the progress of our careers truly depend on a concept that is so fuzzy? So I'm going to talk about how several authorities define rigor, which is something that you need to do for yourself so that should you be in an unfortunate place where someone is saying that your work is not rigorous, you'll be able to adequately back it up. And I'll have more conversation about that. And then I will go through the article that was recent literature analysis of how people are using rigor. And I'll just think out loud about my own practice and give you a format that you can then pull from the slides and think about it in terms of your practice. And then we'll have some question and answers, and I'll talk a little bit about what else is coming up at PD Education. So let's define rigor. National Institute of Health in the United States defines it as in any research paradigm, the goal of quality and rigor in qualitative research and quantitative research is to minimize the risk of bias and maximize the accuracy and credibility of the research results. So you'll see that come up a lot, that if we are rigorous, we have minimized the risk of bias and maximized accuracy. Sage for the social sciences said, in order to ensure the process is trustworthy And Guba and Lincoln, by the way, 1989 is a reference that I used in my dissertation. It was the top reference. They discussed rigor more completely than anybody, and they are probably still being quoted, even though it's an older piece. So Guba and Lincoln proposed the research should satisfy 4 criteria. They are credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. And credibility ensures the study measures what it was intended to measure and not other things. But I've given you the link there, and all 4 things are defined, and the rest of that article is excellent if you're a qualitative researcher. So in this Informing Science Regarding Transdiscipline Work article, and this is the one that I found the most provocative, and that you have the link for it as well. Rigor definitions tend to fall in. So what they did was a extensive review of literature, choosing articles that had rigor in their title, feeling like that was going to be a pretty good chance that they were going to define rigor in the article itself. And their work was to look at what do we mean when we say rigor, and that what they found, just to give you kind of a heads up, was that rigor and relevance are 2 words that are closely tied together in people's articles, and that they don't mean the same thing all the time by any means. So we'll go a little bit more in depth here. Rigor definitions tend to fall into 1 of 2 categories: criteria-based and compliance-based. And I think frequently when I work with doctoral students, they're thinking of the compliance-based one, that someone has said their work needs to be more rigorous and has set a set of standards, and that if you go to those standards, you'll be able to say your work is rigorous. And well, you'll just see this article kind of blows those ideas up a bit, but at the very least, it's quite provocative. So are you being rigorous because you're fulfilling some criteria, or are you being rigorous because your work complies with other outside standards? And I would add to that, are you being rigorous because it has a meaning to you personally as a researcher? And if so, have you defined what that meaning is? And or are you being rigorous because, and this is not a bad thing, but all of our work is being held to a standard. And are we being rigorous because we want to meet those standards so that we pass those hoops easily? Which of those 2, criteria or compliance, is appropriate depends on the research context. Even more variation was found with respect to relevance, which is often used as a catch-all for research characteristics that aren't associated with rigor. Okay, so we have a couple of words. Nobody's particularly agreeing on them. Let's see what else we can find. So our goal today is to have some provocative conversation that helps us feel comfortable that we are going to hit our own bullseye as we define it and as it's defined by our fields, because all of you here come from many, many different fields. You work with many different universities and have many different supervisors. And so what level of rigor you have to attain to hit your bullseye is part of this open-ended conversation. So back to transdiscipline. Research rigor does not come for free. It costs, can include economic, time, and also extend to accepting constraints on methodologies and selection of what is an appropriate topic. So they're asking the very important question of whether or not rigor and relevance are actually helping us have our work be more meaningful in our field. Used to be it was a set of standards. Oh, that work isn't rigorous enough. Oh, we shouldn't, it's not quite scientific enough. But they're saying, let's move beyond that. And let's ask, what is the relevance of rigor and relevance to the field that we're in? And why is it that a rigorous set of whatever it is, standard, is going to make our work better for our field? And then there's this very interesting, relates to concepts of diffusion, filters, and fitness that have been examined in previous informing science research. So without having to go into that research, I offer you this drawing, which is someone reading our journal article and then saying, oh, these people aren't enough like me, I'm not going to pay attention. Or, oh, these people didn't do X, Y, and Z that I expect them to do as basic research, so I'm not going to pay attention. And at the end of the day, the bottom line with both rigor and relevance is that other researchers have these sometimes obscure filters in our heads that if we don't pay attention to the fact they might be there, our work won't get taken seriously because we ran into one of their filters. That's a much bigger topic, much more in depth than I'm going to go into for 15 minutes, but I'm dropping it in here and I'm giving you the article, and I'm strongly suggesting if this is appropriate for your practice, you dig into this because it asks some very interesting questions. Okay, so, and then they end by saying, research rigor means different things to different people. Our hope is that this discussion will encourage researchers not to use the term offhandedly. I have that same hope for my 15 minutes today. And then too often, the term's been used casually, seeming to assume we all mean the same thing when we hear it, which isn't the case. And if you're in transdiscipline, if you're one of the people trying to bridge some of these ever-widening silos, the challenge that's presented by rigor is particularly acute. Because even within a discipline, you're going to find people disagreeing on what it means. If you cut across disciplines, you have more of that. All right, so I was asked to do these 15 minutes to talk about my work as a researcher. And so I was rather strong in saying that I suggest you figure out for yourself why you're interested in rigor, and why my need for rigor is to hold myself to the highest possible standard of research in the midst of the fact that I do research as a part of a very busy work life. My research would be categorized as insider research, meaning it grows out of my work for a company and with a company. And one of the challenges that's thrown at insider research, maybe some of you are also insider researchers, is that our work can be expedient. And it can, of course, because we're trying to balance lots of balls, and only one of those balls is our research. So I am interested in rigor, so I feel comfortable saying that my work goes above and beyond that. I do it in 3 ways. I work with rigor in 3 ways. I use models when I write, and those of you that have been attending the 15 minutes or will be going back to the other 15 minutes at some other time have seen that I'm getting work ready for writing in journals. Well, I look up many articles from those journals and I write to those models, because we are all held to outside standards, and you lay 2 or 3 things from the same publisher down next to each other, you can see the standards that they're writing for. So that's one way that I get to rigor, and that's not quite compliance, but along that same lines. I also use rigor as a way to overview and reflect upon criteria. My work is innovative in pushing what is done in higher education in support of doctoral students, because we work in a remote environment. And so reflection is, I'm a qualitative researcher primarily, and reflection is very big in my practice. And so I must hold myself to a standard, two standards of rigor. One is that I reflect frequently on what I'm finding and what it means and how it goes together in my practice. And also that I look for disconfirming evidence. Both of those are standards of rigor to me along the criterion way. And then reflection, asking, what do I have to do? How did my outcomes come from who I am? Is to whether and to what extent my work advances the field, because that's my ultimate goal. So the transdiscipline article, and this is the model that I'm hoping you might choose to take on, broke up all scientific research into the stages and said, how is rigor shown in design? People who say they have a rigorous design, what do they mean? And they talk about minimizing bias and subjectivity. Reflexively, I ask myself, and this is something you might do, is to go through each one of these and ask yourself the same questions. How do I minimize bias or subjectively? Or do I just own that there is bias and subjectivity? I delimit it, and then I move on to working with it to uncover disconfirming evidence. So they're just, bias and subjectivity can be handled many ways in our research. And I tend to follow I just say I'm a qualitative researcher and there will be bias and subjectivity. And in this particular thing, here is where I can see it. And let's move on past that and see if we can find in those same arena disconfirming evidence that that the bias was wrong. Bias can be used much like a hypothesis is used, where you go look for things that disprove it. You have different ways of working with these ideas. So execution is another way that we see rigor thrown up, that something was systematically and faithfully done. And this author notes that there are some methodologies that in fact have kind of married themselves to a rigorous way of being, and they give us step by step things that we have to do. Reflexively about my own practice, I always asking, is there more evidence that could have been gathered? Because nature of insider research is you do as much as you can as you go along. And so feedback loops, more feedback loops, and looking for more research. And then I asked myself, is anyone ever satisfied with their design? This idea that we would do a research design and then we would do it always the same way over and over, it hasn't been true in my research experience. I never am completely satisfied with one research design. I always at the end wished I'd thought of doing a few more things so I could answer a few more questions. So the idea of that you kind of pin it down and you say, this is the way it is, seemed foreign to me. Analysis is another place where people say they have rigorous analysis. And for me, that means double or triple checking how I got to where I went to, and then whenever possible, going back to people and saying, you were part of this. Do you think this is right? Or what else do you have to add? And in the product, in the findings, it can be specifically tied. I did all this rigorous work and I was completely transparent, and therefore you can trust my findings. And this author pointed out that it actually might be a way of trying to persuade the readers or reviewers that your work is good. And I have to own that that kind of felt like something that maybe I was guilty of in other times of my career, and that might be something I'd have to watch out for. At the end of writing an article, I think there is a natural proponent of wanting to have it be the very best it can be. And so then at what point are we pushing a little too hard on that envelope? And of course, our outcomes, some people would say that if it goes to publication, it's rigorous enough, and I probably am in that camp. So this is interpretive rigor, and you would have seen other literature about interpretive rigor. And it suggests that especially social science should go towards making humanity better, making our world better. I think most of us as researchers do believe that our work are for those reasons. I certainly do. But I wouldn't have seen it as part of rigor. I would have seen that as a value. So I was just interested by that. All right, so I went through all those, and the conclusion that they came up with that I agree with is, especially if you are a scientist that's trying to cut across a couple of disciplines, hold yourself to it. Were you systematic in your inquiry? Does your work employ an appropriate design for the questions you're asking? I would add, that includes, did you get all the data you could? And does it ask challenging questions that will advance your field? And that's how they're personally deciding after all of their inquiry that we can hold rigor to that. And anything else we want to hold it to, we have to have discussions because we may not agree. So that's what works for me. Many questions have come in. I will get straight to that. I just want to say quickly that this is the only thing going on this month. We have 2 more 15 minutes coming up this month. And I'll try real briefly to look up what I'm going to talk about. But we have 2 Zoom meetings that are coming. That one tomorrow is still at 3:15 or 3:30. I think we made it 3:30. Excuse the slide. And it's a group that's been ongoing where people are deciding what they're going to do next. Certainly, you're welcome to drop in. The last 2 would be on at 5 o'clock, but those are on Tuesday. That's the Zoom link. And on Wednesdays, and this will be ongoing every Wednesday all the way through spring semester, because it's been very successful. 5 p.m., you click on Zoom, you turn off your mic, and you write for an hour. And at the end of the hour, people may talk about what they've done, or they may not, and just say goodbye. But it is a place where we can hold ourselves to at least getting that hour of work done, and probably then having to do the prep work so we can actually write during that hour. It's really useful for me. And it keeps my writing going along every week in a way that feels excellent. And I think that's the case for other people who are coming as well. So you have the Zoom links in the handouts.